Going to come. At the end, we may take a few questions. I'll let him sort of give you the guidelines for that. We'll sort of watch the clock on that. But I want to thank everyone for coming. And at this time, I want to ask Dr. Jonathan Sarfati to come. Thank you.
Well, thank you for everyone who helped get this meeting together, and thank you for all for coming on a Monday night to hear about this very important topic. And yeah, I do like to have question times, and the only rule I have in question times is that what you say must end in a question mark. Is that fair? Now, I better give you a geography lesson about where I come from, because all maps here are wrong. Okay, here's the right one. Here's where I come from. I did move over here in 2010. We live here now. We live not too far from Atlanta. And one reason we moved here, we have two little grandkids who live in Florida, granddaughters. And of course, it's much easier to drive 500 miles and fly 9,000 miles. Now, I am a PhD scientist, so no one can bluff you and say there aren't any such people. And if I wanted to show you the first part of my talk was about how science grew out of a Christian worldview and was still born in places like ancient Greece and ancient China that lacked this Judeo-Christian worldview of a divine lawmaker, a God of order who's not the author of confusion. And other worldviews just can't provide that. So what else? I'm also a chess master, a little hobby of mine. I'm a retired chess master, you might say. Sometimes I play blindfold. I'm playing against these 12 guys here, I'm here, and this guy's making the moves for me and telling me what they're doing. And I played with some good people in my time. Another thing, I'm also ethnically Jewish. My name is the Hebrew word for Frenchman, so I can tell Jewish jokes and French jokes and get away with it. But of course, a lot of my time these days is spent dealing with this man, because you might say he is the patron saint of the religion of the Western university education system. I mean, ACLU talk about getting rid of religion from the education system. Well, no, they didn't. They got rid of Christianity from it, but I would argue that they substituted a different religion, which you could call evolutionary humanism, which said instead of there's a God who makes the rules for us and made us so he owns us and has the right to make the rules for us and loves us so he makes the rules for our good, we've got we make our own rules. We're rearranged pond scum. And one place you can find out more is our website. I mean, we'll take some notes about this, won't you? Our website is creation.com, okay? And it has about 13,000 articles on it. And in fact, you go here, you can look at the search button, you can find just about any topic you want to find related to the Bible, Christianity, the creation evolution issue, even things like the racial issues. We've got the origin of races from a biblical standpoint, right up to dating, dinosaurs, astronomy, age of the earth questions, what does Genesis mean? Who is Jesus? Those things are all found in Q&A pages. So creation.com. In fact, we actually have a sign-up sheet at the book table for our newsletter, Info Bites. And we promise not to spam you or to sell your address to any third party. If you sign up with your name and email, don't have to say that at the book table. There's a sign-up sheet, you can do that. Another book you might be interested in is the commentary on Genesis 1 to 11, which talks about it from a scientific viewpoint as well as what the original text said. That should be an important thing. What did the text mean to those who originally read the text? And also going wider and arguing that the rest of the biblical authors and Jesus himself understood Genesis to be an historical account. So if you say Genesis is wrong, you're saying the New Testament writers and Jesus were wrong too, which I don't want to accept myself, okay? I'm sorry about that was there. I meant to show you this. Sometimes does have a PowerPoint. This one here, the Genesis accounts. But let's first of all, I want to talk about some misunderstandings about both what science is and the misunderstandings about the history of science. Well, first of all, let's look at the two kinds of science, you might say. I mean, the science that put me on the moon and cures diseases and builds technology you could call operational or observational science. And the big thing about that is testability, repeatability. You see, I don't have to, for instance, water boils at 100 degrees. Okay, everywhere else in the world was at 100, here it boils at 212. It's a bit strange, okay? The point is, it's not going to boil at 312 tomorrow. You can go and test and repeat this for yourself. And ideally do it at sea level, make sure it's pure water and with bumping chips and all that. But you get the idea, it's repeatable, testable science. But what about the claims of origins, of evolution in general? You could say this is a part of historical science, but I think it's a totally different kettle of fish because it doesn't rely on observations or testing. It relies on things that we find in the present and make up stories about the past to explain how the present got here. And some of the stories are probably true, some of them are not, but it's again not based on actual observation or test. Now, I'm not sure some of you may have seen a debate between creationist Ken Ham and Bill Nye, who once played a science guy on children's television. And Bill Nye didn't agree with this distinction, but it's interesting that he is going against leading evolutionists who accept this distinction. Like, for instance, E.O. Wilson, a very famous Harvard evolutionist. If a moving automobile were an organism, functional biology would explain how it operates, while evolutionary biology would explain, reconstruct its origin, how it came to be made. So he's admitting there's a difference between how the science of how a car operates and how the car got to be where it is. And another famous evolutionist from the last century, that evolutionary biology, in contrast with physics and chemistry, is a historical science. And he goes further and says that laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques for the historical science. So again, these are evolutionists who admit a distinction between historical and operational science that Bill Nye thinks doesn't exist. Another thing that's important to do is to define our terms. What do we actually mean by evolution? Well, here I'm going with the late evolutionist from the UK, G.A. Kirkut. There's a theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source which itself came from an inorganic form. This theory can be called a general theory of evolution. See what it's saying? It's from goo to you via the zoo. It's not just the existence of change. It's a specific type of change that goes uphill from some sort of primordial soup, non-living chemicals producing the first self-reproducing cell, and then all the different varieties of life we see today. And he admits the evidence that supports it's not sufficiently strong for us to allow us to consider it as anything more than a working hypothesis. So I actually disapprove of people saying evolution is just a theory. I don't believe it's good enough to be a theory. See, a theory in science is something that has good evidence, like the theory of relativity, the theory of gravity. He's saying that it's actually just a working hypothesis or a conjecture. Now, this quote also shows that evolution, the general theory, includes the origin of first life from non-living chemicals. And the leaders in that field often call it chemical evolution. So it definitely is part of the general theory of evolution. Now, another thing which is not true is that if evolution were ignored, science would be impossible. That was one of the scaremongerings that Bill Nye was doing in his debate. But it's interesting to see, to actually work out what science actually depends on evolution. I can tell you my spectroscopic work for my PhD had no dependence on evolution. Newton's theory didn't. Maxwell's equations of electromagnetism didn't. Relativity didn't. And even when you go to biology, this Mark Kirchner says that over the last 100 years, almost all of biology has proceeded independent of evolution, except for evolutionary biology itself. That's a surprise. Molecular biology, biochemistry, physiology have not taken the evolution into account at all. Now, he probably doesn't like that it hasn't taken it into account, but he's admitting that it seems to have done pretty well without taking evolution into account. Even medicine, for instance, I mean, think of the great medical advances in vaccination. Edward Jenner, a creationist, and Louis Pasteur, a Catholic creationist. Edward Jenner was before Darwin. Pasteur was a contemporary of Darwin. They didn't need evolution. Think about anesthesia. That was James Simpson, who was a biblical creationist. In fact, he appealed that it was okay to give Queen Victoria anesthetics because when God created Eve from Adam's rib, he put Adam to sleep, which means he basically used anesthesia. And so he justified it. Then you have antiseptic surgery. That was Joseph Lister, again, a creationist and a follower of Louis Pasteur as well. So again, that's a very important thing. And even antibiotics, one of the Nobel Prize winners for discovering penicillin was Ernst Chaney, who was Orthodox Jewish creationist, who was very scathing against Darwinian evolution. So medicine was not the evolution. And then you think about some of the arguments you hear. Well, the cough clearly evolved so it would expel objects out of your airway. But can't you say what's the design mechanism to do that? Saying it evolved to do that doesn't really tell you anything. The function is what's important. That's explainable by design. Now let's look at the two views of science again and apply them to geology. Well, the Grand Canyon, I've been there once. I really need to go more often and stay there longer. But it's interesting how you go to the Grand Canyon, what do we see? We see there's a deep gash in the ground with these very flat rock layers. And no one alive has seen it form. So how did it get there? Well, my theory is that it was a lot of water over a little bit of time. The evolutionists say it's a little bit of water over a lot of time. So why do we have different theories here? Well, the difference is because of our starting assumption. We both have starting assumptions. My starting assumption is the Bible really is a reliable history. It talks about a globe-covering flood. And the runoff of the flood is going to produce something like the Grand Canyon. The evolutionists, even before Darwin, you have the geological evolutionists like Hutton and Lyell, who believed that there was no flood and therefore we have to rely on slow and gradual changes to produce the landforms we see today. But the point is, if you understand something like a flood, you should realize that in a lot of physical processes, you can trade intensity for time. So if you have lots of intensity, you don't actually need the millions of years that people keep on talking about. And also, we have parallels of it. Like this is from one of the Mount St. Helens aftermath for some of most of these students were born, I presume, in 1980. Okay, but this is actually one of the canyons that was carved. It's called Engineers Canyon. You see, this is interesting that we have this river going through here, but the river didn't cause the canyon caused the river. The canyon was carved in about 2.5 years by a much larger amount of water, and the river is following the path already carved out for it. And it's actually notable around the world we see a lot of rivers are in valleys that are much larger than the river, which is intriguing. So a much larger amount of water seemed to carve that. And this little Grand Canyon, it's a 40th the size of the Great Grand Canyon. It's still 30, 40 meters tall. I don't use metrics at university, can't say 40 meters. Okay, good. Okay, and this was carved in a single day. In more recent times, we've seen things like the Oroville Dam catastrophe just last year. Again, reinforced concrete with a lot of water just did a huge amount of damage in a very short period of time. So again, when you have a high intensity process, you don't need the long time for it. Low intensity, you need lots of time. Now let's go into the history of science a bit. See, I mentioned Isaac Newton before. Now, in fact, he was probably the greatest scientist of all time. I mean, a lot of scientists would agree with that because of what he discovered, like the three laws of motion, the law of gravity. He was joint inventor of calculus. He invented the reflecting telescope, discovered the spectrum of light. He discovered the law of cooling. Okay, all these things, any one of those would be amazing, but he discovered all of those things, and yet he wrote more about the Bible than he wrote about science. And this is true of a lot of the founders. In fact, they did their science and they were motivated by their Christian worldview. It wasn't in spite of it, it was actually because of their Christian worldview. And I wrote more in this article called creation.com/roots. It's a shortcut for the biblical roots of modern science. And another one is, why does science work at all? Creation.com/why science. I'm going to go through some of these assumptions that are provided by the biblical worldview but are not provided by any other worldview. And one of them is that the universe is real, which seems obvious to us, but I mean it's not obvious to some people. The postmodernism which is popular at university denies objective reality. But I don't notice postmodernists driving off cliffs because they know very well law of gravity works whether they believe it or not. There's an objective reality, and the Bible believer can say, well, this is because God objectively created the universe, and man was created on 6 days, which means you've got 5 days before man, so you've got objective reality that doesn't depend on humans being around. It's still real. And of course you've got the New Age ideas, some of the Eastern philosophies which deny things are real. Like one statement you may have heard from them is, everything is an illusion. Now how about you think about the statements and realize that this is what you call a self-refuting argument. It's an argument that chops the branch you're sitting on. See, if everything is an illusion, that statement has to be an illusion too, doesn't it? Another self-refuting argument is something like, there is no truth. Well, how can that be true? Or, you can't know anything for certain. Well, how do you know that? Or you find Christians are wrong to judge that behaviours are wrong, but hang on, isn't that a statement of judgment? That judging is wrong, okay? In fact, the Bible tells us we're supposed to judge righteously, not according to appearance. In the Bible, Jesus told us to judge. He told us not to judge hypocritically, but told us to judge righteously. And what about the anti-apologists who don't think we should use rational arguments to defend the faith, but they'll argue with you that you shouldn't be using arguments? Okay. Another one, here's another one I can tell you, some cultists, for instance, don't use the word Trinity, they tell us, because you stick to words that are found in the Bible, but in fact, the word Bible is not found in the Bible. And here's another one which is very popular with people like Richard Dawkins. They will say that only empirically supportable claims are true. So the question is, what experiment did you use to support that claim? You see what I mean about self-refuting arguments. A lot of these arguments that you hear actually undermine themselves. And going back to this one, I mentioned the universe being orderly is an important thing for science to work. And you see, you cannot use science to prove the universe is orderly. You have to assume that order to do the science in the first place. But it comes from the idea of God as divine lawmaker. It doesn't come out of, say, the Greek pantheon, where all the different Greek gods had their own sets of rules and they're all capricious. It doesn't come out from the New Age ideas where the universe is one great thought that could change its mind at any moment. And atheism can't produce that. I mean, there are plenty of atheists who believe the universe is orderly, but they didn't get it from their atheism. You cannot go from the proposition, there is no God, to the proposition, the universe is orderly. It doesn't follow from their atheistic worldview. And also we have dominion over the rest of creation. That goes right back to Genesis 1. And again, if we had to pray to the river god to boil water, we couldn't do science. If creation were divine, science would not be possible. But in fact, God gave man dominion to investigate the universe. Otherwise, we couldn't be scientists. And also, I want to point out a few myths about that. One is the myth of the Dark Ages. There were no such thing. In fact, the Dark Ages were a period of enormous advances in science, in culture, art, music, logic. Even things like the carnival was invented in the so-called Dark Ages. And just a few myths that you may have heard. No, they did not believe the earth was flat before Columbus. So that's a lot of your education out the window, isn't it? Because you've all heard that. Total utter myth. And I can easily prove, it's so easy to disprove these myths that are so widely held. For instance, you go back over 700 years before Columbus to this leading church scholar, the Venerable Bede, a church historian and monk, theologian. We call the earth a globe, you get that? If you weren't sure what he meant, he said again, a perfect globe. And just to really make sure, it's not circular like a shield, but rather like a ball. And this was standard knowledge in the church throughout the Middle Ages. They knew what the shape of the earth was. In fact, when you get to the High Middle Ages, the leading philosopher, theologian Thomas Aquinas, He was trying to show people how you go about proving things. So he picked something that was absolutely obvious to all his readers, the shape of the earth. That's why he picked the shape of the earth, because everyone knew it at the time. And he said the physicist proves the earth to be round by one means, and the astronomer by another. And another thing that was invented in the New Age, in the Middle Ages, was the university, modelled on theological colleges. See, the university has a beginning in the so-called Dark Ages. And the students at the earliest universities, they all had to study astronomy, including the clergy. And the astronomy textbook they used was this one, called The Sphere by Johannes Sacrobosco. The sphere, well, because of our planet being a sphere, that's what basically what it was. And he actually tells people how you can know the Earth is a sphere. He gave you the very good proofs. One proof, he said, it's not a case of seeing Mars go down the horizon. That tells you you can't see that very easily. So what he said instead, you set up a signal fire on the beach and you go out in your boat until you can't see it. But then you climb the mast and of course you can see it down because you're higher up there. But yet, on the flat Earth view, it should be a larger distance from the top of the mast to compared to what's on the deck, because we've got the hypotenuse here compared to these two sides. And yet you can see it. Or they knew very well they can come into shore and you see the hills before you see the beach, even if the hills are further away. They knew that. They also knew you saw different constellations depending on your latitude. They knew very well that you saw at different time zones depending on your longitude. So they knew these sort of things. And they also knew that the smaller star we see is much bigger than the Earth. They knew that. And they knew the moon doesn't have its own light, so therefore when the Earth gets in the way of the sun, you have an eclipse. And that was one of the earliest proofs of a global Earth. As a shadow of the Earth during the lunar eclipse is always round, no matter where in the sky it is. That's only possible if you have a ball blocking the light. So they knew these things. And it's just interesting how the leading evolutionists today, even flat earther today, is actually an evolutionist. So it's interesting, it's not a Christian thing, it never has been a Christian thing, this flat earth stuff. Now what about another thing which is really interesting is this symbol here called the globus cruciger. It means a cross-bearing globe. It's very common in medieval portraits of royalty. The globe was a symbol of the earth. Globe being a symbol of flat earth. Okay. And the cross was big because it symbolized Jesus' sovereignty over the earth. And he held it in his hand to say that Christ has given me the right to rule this domain of the earth. You see, over and over again we see the globus cruciger, which proves that the royals and their subjects knew what the shape of the earth was. How many point having a symbol if the subjects didn't know what it meant? So those are some things which refute a lot of the poor arguments that have been told to try to undermine. In fact, it started in the 19th century, this idea of a church believing in a flat earth, used it to discredit Christianity, to undermine their opposition to Darwinism. Another thing which is worth just briefly talking about is the whole issue of Galileo versus the church, but in fact, it was really science versus science and religion versus religion in a sense, because what they have, the science of the day was a geocentric science. Thanks to Ptolemy in the 2nd century, the scientific worldview at the time was Earth as a movable center. The Bible doesn't tell you one way or the other. It was a science that it asserted very strongly. And in fact, the scientific evidence in Galileo's time seemed to support a geocentric worldview. It wasn't until a few centuries after Galileo that the evidence weighed decisively in favor of a moving Earth view. But Galileo didn't have the evidence on his side. But when it came to the Bible, it was actually very easy to understand that the Bible is using reference frame language. See, when we describe motion, every physicist knows that you have to describe motion in relation to a reference frame. So the Bible talks about the earth and the sun rises on a reference frame. It's quite awkward to say, well, the earth is rotating in such a way that the line of sight of the sun is tangential to the horizon. It's hard to say that. Much easier to say, well, the sun is rising and setting as we do today. And in pagan literature, we have the same sort of understanding. This is the famous Aeneid, very well known, memorized in the Middle Ages. We set out from harbour and land and city received. So, we say here from the point of view of a man on the boat, there's a land which seems to be moving away. Of course, you would use like the boats that are moving away. So it means you can choose the reference frame. We might say the Bible doing the same sort of thing as Virgil is doing. Just choosing a convenient reference frame like modern physicists do today. Okay, so there's a few things that are just destroying a few myths about the Bible and science. Now, another interesting assumption you need, which again atheists can't do, is our thoughts are rational. Now, it seems obvious to us, God made us in his image, he's rational, so we should be rational. Jesus is called the Logos. If you look at the Greek in John 1, in the beginning was the Word. The Greek for word is Logos, and that's the word we get logic from. So if we're followers of Logos, we have every reason to be logical. But if we're rearranged pond scum, why should we be logical at all? And C.S. Lewis pointed out that the whole evolution of man was an accident, that our present thoughts are mere accidents. The accidents are byproducts of the movement of atoms. This holds for the thoughts of materialists as well as for anyone else's. But if their thoughts are accidental byproducts, why should we believe to be true? I see no reason that one accident should be able to give a correct account of all the other accidents. And in fact, Darwin himself had this problem. The horror doubt always arises with the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value at all or trustworthy. Why should anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind? If there are any convictions in such a mind. So in fact, therefore, why should he trust his own conclusions about evolution if he's just a evolved monkey mind? See, natural selection can only select for survival value. It won't necessarily select for logic or truth, but for survival value. So it doesn't matter how illogical your statement is, if it gives you more offspring, then that's what natural selection is going to work on. And so you have another evolutionist. If my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose my beliefs are true, and hence have no reason to suppose my brain to be composed of atoms. So that's a problem. He's an ardent materialist, but he couldn't justify rationality, even though he wrote for something called the Rationalist Annual. He couldn't justify rationality under his own belief system. And sometimes it takes a comedian to really show up the problems. And here is a famous British comedian, John Cleese, on this.
We scientists have fabricated a gene which we scientists believe gives people the keys to believe in God. In other words, this God gene releases chemicals into our body which create the impression that there is meaning in the universe. And this God gene is just here, between the gene which we scientists now know makes us eat coconut ice cream, and this gene here, which causes people with weak egos to grasp around desperately for simple explanation. Now, the discovery of this God gene is a big step forward in our quest to show that every bit of human behavior can be explained away mechanically, because we've now also located a gene which makes some people believe that every piece of human behavior can be explained away mechanically, and it's here right next to the gene that makes you go to see Nicolas Cage movies, and right under this gene, which can cause you to forget that since the 1920s, quantum physics has destroyed forever the idea that everything can be explained mechanically. Now, the gene which causes us to forget this obvious fact is very dominant in some people, especially me. And we scientists now know that it's closely linked to this gene here, which gives you such a weak sense of self that you hang on to anything that makes you religion or a reductionist universe, which is right over this gene here that makes you want to punch people in the head when they take the scientific process and subject it to their pathological visual mindedness. Thank you. I did. And by the way, we now know that there is a gene that causes you to say, thank you, I needed that, because there, I got punched in the head.
Yeah, so that's good to see some things like that. Now, another interesting with science is the importance of honest reporting of results. And again, this goes to the issue of that there's an absolute morality in the world. Now, I'm not saying atheists can't be good people. I'm saying that under the atheistic worldview, there's no objective basis for saying something is good and something is evil. I'm going to show you a few examples of that. And again, this goes to what atheists themselves tell you.
Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us, loud and clear, and I must say that these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, no purposive forces of any kind, no life after death. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be completely dead. That's just all that's going to be the end of me. There's no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either.
Well, it's an interesting admission. I mean, he's dead now, so he's not an atheist anymore. But I mean, he admits that under atheism, there's no ultimate foundation for ethics, which means no ultimate basis for right and wrong, and no ultimate meaning in life. Well, we'd be rearranged ponds, come our destiny is going to be fertilizer, and no free will for humans, which means he couldn't help saying that logically. Okay. Now, here's another thing. Another thing from John Cleese in his famous British comedy series from the 70s called Faulty Towers. There's a little bit of language in it, but I'm showing you this for a purpose, okay? So I do have this as loud as it can be. It's a set to 100. I don't think we'll, yeah. Now, there's a reason I'm showing you this, because Richard Dawkins himself, a leading atheistic evolutionist from Oxford University, Darwin's biggest disciple today, actually commented on this. He said, of course, we laugh at his irrationality. Instead of beating the car, we investigate the problems. So why do we laugh at a judge who punishes a criminal? Here are his reasons for that very strange thing. The concepts like blame and responsibility are bandied about freely where human wrongdoers are concerned. It doesn't a truly scientific materialistic view of the nervous system make nonsense of the very idea of responsibility. Mental constructs like blame and responsibility, even evil and good, are built into our brains by millennia of Darwinian evolution. So he's admitting, under a consistent evolutionary worldview, there's no such thing as good or evil. There's no such thing as responsibility or blame, and therefore punishing people as free moral agents who actually choose between good and evil is as silly as punishing a car for not starting. See, this is showing, this is not some village atheist. This is one of the most famous atheists in the world saying this, the author of The God Delusion. So when I like to actually quote from the author's mouth, show you what I'm saying is actually what the leading atheists actually believe is consistent atheism. So now I've actually just shown you some of the philosophical things about why atheism is not a useful worldview to have for morality or for rationality. I also want to show you some examples of why I think the biblical worldview actually makes far more sense from a scientific perspective. First, I'll start off with some evidence of rapid formation of rock layers. Now, the basically three things that would support a globe-covering flood. One is rapidly formed rock layers. The other is that these rock layers have enormous extent. And the third one is it's very little time between the layers. Those are the three main aspects of it. Now, when it comes to rapid formation of the layers, I'd say when you have fossils like this, a mother ichthyosaur giving birth to her baby here, I mean, could this thing have been lying on the ocean floor for millions of years slowly giving birth? I mean, I've heard of long, difficult labor, but don't you think it's a bit far? And these are quite big creatures, see. So it had to be buried and fossilized before it had a chance to decay or get eaten by scavengers. And the layer it's in is enormous. I can get an idea, it's a very, very big layer formed extremely rapidly. I mean, fossils themselves are evidence of rapid formation. Have you guys ever seen fossil roadkill? It's not going to happen, is it? Because you've got to bury it before it has a chance to decay. And when it comes to dinosaurs, we see things like this fighting dinosaur picture. Again, they were fossilized in the middle of their fight, the Protoceratops versus Velociraptor, a famous fossil in Mongolia. And now, since we're actually at a university where Dr. Mary Schweitzer actually teaches here now, apparently, which is good for your university. But in the last 25 years or so, she's been discovering quite amazing things in dinosaur bones that, in my opinion, actually go against the millions of years dogma. It's not her opinion, I hasten to add, but I think that's what the scientific evidence is teaching us. And here is how she explains it on 60 Minutes.
A mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this, and you think, what? You
I
think
didn't want to tell anybody.
that you'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again, I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
how could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million.
You see what they admitted there? The existing rules of science say under 1 million years. That's what they're admitting. This is what science tells us, but they'd rather have maintained their belief system of 68 million years, despite what the actual science they're admitting will tell us. I know she's got her own explanations of a certain reaction, which is called the phantom reaction, which is supposed to preserve these things, but in fact, as a chemist, I tell you, phantom reaction is usually used to dissolve organic material, and the thing is, it should have dissolved certain things that she says she's found, you see. So if there's a phantom reaction going on, you'd expect it to do everything the phantom reaction does, including destroying stuff that she actually found. So that doesn't make any chemical sense. But that's basically what they try to argue. Now, another thing she discovered was DNA, which is very interesting. In fact, the test they use a very interesting fluorescent stain here, DAPI, and the DAPI lodges in the minor groove of a double helix. So it means you have to have double helical DNA for this test to work. But that means you've got to have relatively intact DNA. I'm not saying it's intact enough to clone a dinosaur. It's still broken up, but it's quite intact, as you see, for this test to work. And yet, when you do the test of how long DNA is going to last, it's actually very short. And this is the time to complete fragmentation. I've got proper degrees and numerical degrees here, so you can both understand both. Right? Okay, so below freezing, it should last about 6.8 million years. And yet, in the dinosaur bone, 10 times older than that, you've got DNA intact enough to form a double helix. And that's if it's frozen, but dinosaurs were alleged to live in tropical climates, which means you're going to have an even lower time for DNA to be completely fragmented. So, and also in Montana, you've got the freeze-thaw cycle, which is very bad for trying to preserve organic molecules. So everything about the defined DNA is extremely powerful evidence against the millions of years dogma. And you might remember from about 3 years ago, they awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry to these three men, and here is what the Nobel Prize site said. In the early 70s, scientists believed that DNA was an extremely stable molecule. But Thomas Lindahl demonstrated that DNA decays at a rate that ought to have made the development of life on Earth impossible. So how do we even exist? So he was motivated to discover that we have repair machines. And these other two discovered different types of repair machine without which life would be impossible. But this is a problem for original life ideas, because DNA just cannot last very long. But the other problem is that DNA codes for its own repair machines. Now that's a problem, because unless you have repair machines, those instructions will be degraded to make a repair machine, which will mean to do an even worse job at making repair machines, the next generation, which will do a worse job of preserving the DNA instructions for them. So unless you have repair machines and DNA pretty much working perfectly, life would not work. Could not even get started. So this is interesting, from real cutting-edge science showing you that DNA, that life would not get started. Now, going into the point about a lot of this is that DNA is the information storage system for living things. It's how information gets passed on from one to the other. In fact, DNA has, even the simplest living thing has about 600 kilobytes of information, but to duplicate what it did when it divided in two, it took over 100 computers running for 9 to 10 hours. So the data compression of DNA must be amazing. And also, we have even more information. We have 1,000 Bible-sized books of information, 3 gigabytes worth, so 5,000 times as much as a microplasma. 1,000 Bible-sized books, or only 200 times the size of the IRS tax code. And so how did that arise? It's very interesting. How could DNA arise in a primordial soup? We know it is this unstable. And the point is also, they believe that life could have begun in an RNA world. That's the top theory of the origin of life, is the RNA world. But RNA is much less stable than DNA. It has an extra hydroxy group on, which actually means it wants to cleave itself, it wants to cut itself up into ribbon. So RNA is much less stable than DNA. And DNA, if you want to work on it, you have to preserve it at a liquid nitrogen temperature to stop it decaying. And RNA, you can almost forget about trying to preserve it for very long. So the idea of a primordial RNA molecules doing things, no, it makes no sense from a chemical point of view. And this is what these Nobel Prize winners have discovered. But interesting to see that the DNA is the information storage, but also the information transmission system. But when I say information, see, the DNA information has nothing to do with the chemistry of the DNA in a sense. Remember, the books, you could say, have nothing to do with the ink chemistry. The books are written with ink, but the ink didn't write the books. No one could pour ink on a page and get a book. The information clearly comes from outside the ink, an author, to arrange the ink into letters and words and sentences and paragraphs. And also a language to decode it. Because, for instance, if I gave you a gift, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you? Something for nothing. Now, if you were Germans, would you like me to give you a gift? Well, in German, Gift means poison, okay? And I'll prove that to you because here is the warning label of the Nazi Supon B tablets, which were formed hydrogen cyanide to murder millions of Jews. They warned you, gift gas, poison gas. The gift means poison in German, so it's important, as you can understand, to get the right message. But in fact, DNA actually has multiple languages on the same set of DNA, which is really quite amazing, because one language is hard enough, but what about multiple languages? Like a book you can read in English and German and backwards, you see. And a lot of the so-called junk DNA is involved with these other languages. So the idea that junk DNA belongs in the junk heap. So that means it requires some coding for it. So here are the machines that are used to decode one of the languages, the language that makes the proteins that make you who you are.
This animation demonstrates how the digital information encoded within DNA is used to direct protein synthesis. This is a DNA double helix containing the digital code which directs the cell in all aspects of operation. And here we see a protein complex called an RNA polymerase traveling down the DNA strand. As it moves down the strand, it carefully unwinds the DNA, preparing it for transcription. Inside the polymerase, we see a single-stranded copy of the original instructions being assembled as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. A stop code marks the end of the protein specification, at which point this copy, known as a messenger RNA transcript, exits the polymerase and heads towards a two-part chemical manufacturing machine called the ribosome. While the messenger RNA moves towards the ribosome, transfer RNA molecules attach to specific amino acids in preparation for assembly. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. Using the instructions encoded on the messenger RNA as a template, the transfer RNA molecules align specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids, creating a protein chain. As this chain exits the ribosome, it is met by chaperones which prevent premature folding, while escorting the protein to a barrel-shaped machine called a chaperone. This machine helps fold the protein into the precise shape required to perform its function. Although it is unclear how the chaperone achieves this, we do know that accurate folding is essential in order for the protein to accomplish its intended function. Once the protein is complete, it is released into the cytoplasm to do its job.
And just to reinforce the point, the antibiotics often work by stopping one of these steps involved. So every step has to be working, otherwise life, even the simplest living thing, couldn't even start. I mean, streptomycin antibiotic binds the ribosome itself, but you've got tetracycline antibiotics, they stop one of the protein chain binding to the ribosome, and you have the macrolide stop the protein chain growing. You see, the different antibiotics attack different parts of this process, and that's enough to kill the germ. That just shows you even the germs require so many things working together. And the other thing is that DNA actually has the instructions for its own decoding machines. But you can't read those instructions unless you have the decoding machines. You see, everything has to be working together. And there's something called the Eigen paradox, which says that you have to have, if you've got so many N letters in the DNA, N letters, the accuracy of decoding must be 1 over N. Otherwise, you get error catastrophe. Because imagine if you've got a mistake in the decoding machine gene, it makes the next generation of decoding machines that actually do a worse job. They crash, which means they do a worse job of reading the next generation instructions. So the thing comes to a halt very quickly, and this decoding machines are all working almost perfectly accurately from the beginning. Now, DNA also passes, the information is passed from parent to offspring, but that requires enormous numbers of machines as well.